What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Buffalo Dash. Got a lot on the schedule, so let's not waste any time and jump right in. Kind of a little side note really quickly, the Pac-12 is back. We got news that the Pac-12 will be returning November 6th. We still don't know in terms of schedules, but we have a baseline. There's going to be Pac-12 football this year, but probably the biggest thing is that there's going to be no fans. Kieran, what do you think?
Man, I think, so I think this was to be expected. I think the fact that the Pac-12, even moved back from their initial January 1st, start date that they had put out in the first place, moved that back to November 6th, I think was a big step for them. So I think that no fans is to be expected. I think that that's going to definitely change the dynamic, in terms of a lot of different places from a home field advantage perspective. And so I think that it'll be really interesting to sort of see, how the lack of student sections, the lack of some of those Pac-12 schools who have some of the most fervent fan bases, how that's going to play out.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, the home field advantage, I think in terms of Colorado, Folsom still holds a minor advantage, especially with that altitude, especially teams coming from like California and Washington who aren't used to playing at an altitude. That definitely still holds true to Colorado. But like I said before in the past, Colorado gets really, really loud. And I think that definitely plays into the strategy that Colorado employs. I think that just in general, like college football teams employ a loud stadium for them to be able to call plays and keep some sort of strategy in it. But like you said, it's definitely going to be a big loss for these schools.
Yeah, I think the one school that we have to, you mentioned the altitude. I think the one other school that has a slight advantage over some of the other schools that, it just sort of doesn't necessarily have the same sort of like, Mile High City ring to it is, the University of Utah. Rice Eccles Stadium sits at like 4,500 feet above sea level. And so they, they've been training above sea level as well. I think what will be particularly interesting is at the schools that don't have the super loud fan bases and don't rely on the super loud fans, like schools like UCLA, who in the past couple of years have had pretty low fan turnout compared to some of their Pac-12, other schools in the Pac-12. I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think that, and whether that plays to a school like UCLA's advantage.
Yeah, definitely. You kind of hit on the button. Like as we've watched the football that's already started, schools like LSU have let in a limited amount of fans, but it definitely isn't what they're used to because those are type of schools that sell out every single game, doesn't matter their opponent. They use some sort of artificial crowd noise, but it doesn't really match the same level as having a full 50,000 stadium rivalry game. That you're just not getting that same atmosphere that you would have if you would have fans in the stadium. And I think on an also note, I kind of talked about this a little bit in an article I wrote. It's that these colleges are losing a lot of money without having fans in there. And I looked it up, and they're losing, and on average, $31.9 million in revenue. I mean that's just unheard of. It's a terrible loss for for smaller schools like Colorado.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. What other schools, I saw that you put out that article, CU Independent. And so, so what other schools do you think, stand to lose from that besides the Colorado? Obviously the Pac-12 schools, they're all Power 5 schools. They're all big football schools, like what other schools do you think, you could foresee really suffering due to that revenue loss?
I think in terms of Pac-12, I mean, I can see schools like Oregon State, Arizona, Washington State, even Cal and Stanford, even though they're some of the bigger names in the Pac-12, they still haven't had sellout attendances these past years. And now that they're not getting now that they're not having any revenue coming in terms of ticket sales and food sales and ad revenue and all that stuff that comes with having a college football game, they stand to lose a lot of money, and that's why Colorado went out and partnered with that sports betting company. They needed to find a way to bring in revenue, and it's really easy to oversee like schools like LSU and Clemson and Alabama and Ohio State. They aren't relying on this money coming in from each home game they have. But in terms of these Pac-12 schools, I wouldn't say Colorado is a small school, but it definitely doesn't get the national attention like an LSU and Alabama does. So, a good amount of Pac-12 schools stand to lose a lot of money.
I think one thing that you point out with the SEC comparison there as well to be on the lookout for any Pac-12 viewers is that for schools like say USC, who actually so USC plays in the Coliseum, one of the oldest stadiums in the country, right? You've got to wonder, compared to some of their other counterparts who have the newer sort of like upgraded stadiums. I know the Coliseum's undergone some renovations in the last couple of years or so. You've got to wonder, in terms of just even the artificial crowd noise. Let's say they pump in the artificial crowd noise for those schools and stuff like that. You've got to wonder, in a stadium like the Coliseum that has one of the biggest capacities, and then at the same time has perhaps some the older infrastructure, as far as just being able to pump the sound in. You've got to wonder what kind of effect that's going to have.
You're exactly right. I think a stadium like Folsom, even empty, but if they pump in crowd noise, the way it's shaped, it's enclosed on all sides, and it's very hard for sound to escape that type of stadium. But like you said, a stadium like the Rose Bowl and the Coliseum, and where Cal plays, those are big, traditional oval-shaped coliseums with no large press boxes on top of it, and it just lets the sound go. And even if they're not at full capacity, the stadium's just simply not loud. So, like you said, they stand to lose a lot, even though they pump in this artificial crowd noise.
Yeah, so I think you're exactly right. I think that, and so, perhaps I think, for the Buffs fans, out there watching today, I think that that's another thing that, we can potentially, cross our fingers about in terms of, the CU Buffs being able to gain, a slight advantage about, compared to playing elsewhere, just because of, the way that dynamic's going to be, like it is just going to be advantageous to them at Folsom compared to those teams that are, going to be having to play, approximately 50% of their 7-game schedule in a pretty, in those just wide open stadiums. And, you've got to, and for putting yourself in the shoes of any of those players, just simply just being in one of those stadiums when it's super empty, it's just like the bigger it is, and that and it's like they're all fully empty. The bigger it is, the weirder it is. You know what I mean? Like just the plain and simple. And so that's just going to definitely change the change the dynamic of of those games. And and then compared to in terms of the longer term view for any of the Pac-12 teams, if they have any shot at being able to play some semblance of being able to get their way into the college football playoff, and they're playing against these teams that have, not only like newer stadiums, bigger stadiums with, with the infrastructure to be putting in that loud crowd noise, but they also have some fans. You know what I mean? I mean, like states like Carolina and places like that have been allowing fans into sports stadiums at like 7% capacity or something like that. And so I think that for the Pac-12, that's going to be a strange disadvantage that they're with, down the road.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Like you said, those schools have been letting fans in, and like I bring up the LSU example. Like on TV, you can see they had fans there, and even though it wasn't loud, there was still some semblance of a natural crowd noise that these players get to play behind. While it's not loud and ruckus like it usually is, it's a lot better than what these Pac-12s will be getting. And like you said, if by any chance a Pac-12 school gets to play some sort of playoff football, either a college football playoff or one of the bowl games that they're going to play, they're automatically at a disadvantage, and it's definitely going to be interesting to see. And I don't think the Pac-12 have left them enough time to, at one point in their season, possibly bring fans into the stands because of a seven game season, the push to get a Pac-12 school into the college football playoff. I think that the idea that some sort of fan will be allowed in the stadium is just a pretty moot point at this moment.
Yeah, I agree. And so, I mean, so and in terms of, as we talk about these sort of advantages, disadvantages, that teams are going to be dealing with, across the Pac-12, and then, for us specifically, with the Buffs, Boulder has been going, but like, so Boulder, for the people watching who don't know, there's been some massive COVID spikes, with off-campus partying, things like that. And these COVID spikes have been resulting in not only school going completely offline, completely online, completely off campus, but it's interfering with practice. What do you see as the sort of what do you see as the repercussion there for the Buffs?
I think that it's not a good situation. Like you said, the off-campus partying and the sheer lack of discipline from the students is not only affecting us, but it's affecting our ability to play Colorado football. If we keep contributing to this outbreak, players can't practice, and at some point, when we get closer to the season, if they haven't practiced and we don't have this under control, it's quite possible that Colorado gets left out of this schedule and they don't get to play Pac-12 football in 2020. So I think it's definitely. We're definitely testing the waters here, and we still have the ability to kind of stop this. But if we don't stop this, we're only hurting ourselves, and we're hurting this football program's ability to play college football.
I mean, yeah. So I think that I agree. I think that as any college coach will tell you, college coaches like Nick Saban will say that every day of June counts. In terms of and matters in terms of whether a team is going to be, a national championship viable team and stuff like that. And, even just talking within the scope of, having a winning season within the Pac-12 for the Buffs, the kind of disadvantage that they're put at by missing, a week's worth of practice, whatever. And we're, we're sort of just, a month and a half away from the start of the season. Like, this is time that, brand new coach in Carl Durrell. I mean, it's time. It's not time that they really can afford to be wasting. And so I think that, it's really, there's sort of, an onus on a lot of the students, not only for the current students at CU, but for the players at CU. And then for, the broader fan base, both alumni and just, fans of, University of Colorado football, to actually, to take this seriously, because Boulder's sort of stated where they're at in terms of how they're going to deal with the coronavirus and coronavirus spikes and outbreaks compared to perhaps, some of the SEC schools and things like that. And so I think that it's just really a sort of selfish move on behalf of a lot of these students that, off campus have just been sort of trying to, continue on with like life as it was, for just even for the sake of these players and things like that. And, not to mention, the greater public health hazards.
Yeah, I think you definitely hit it right on the button. I want to pose this question. Do you think the current situation in Boulder puts the rest of the Pac-12 schools on notice to say like, hey, while it's not the football team that's having the outbreak, it's the rest of the student population that's affecting this football program ability to play? Do you think that this whole situation is putting the rest of the Pac-12 on notice? Because personally, I think it is.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I think that the Pac-12, and the states that sort of comprise the Pac-12 and things like that, just from a political standpoint, it made a lot of sense to me as to why the Pac-12 was sort of one of the most conservative conferences, along with the Big Ten in terms of their, reticence to return to play as normal. And so I think that for the Pac-12, I think that Boulder's putting the rest of the Pac-12 on notice. However, I do think that, schools like USC and, schools in Arizona, both like Arizona, Arizona State, I think Utah, I think that, it's the kind of thing at the same time, if they find their ways of sort of isolating players, putting them in, like a team bubble or, whatever system they have in place, they're not gonna be waiting up for CU. You know what I mean? Because for them, it's just that's like one less issue that they have to worry about, more or less. You know what I mean? And so I think that in a lot of ways, while it does set some, hopefully it sets somewhat of a precedent just from a public health perspective. I think on the other hand, I'm not gonna lie. I think that I think that a lot of those schools are just going to, they're going to move on if they can keep things under control for them. They're going to move on with business as usual.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that if this is just a Boulder problem, it makes Boulder look bad, and it's saying that like, hey, while this doesn't have to pertain specifically to the football program, it's like, well, the rest of the student population isn't allowing this football program to get the valuable practice time they need, and then eventually the student population is not letting this football team play games. And if this continues, schools aren't going to want to send their football programs here to play football games, which is another problem because it wouldn't be fair to Colorado to have 7 road games. But I think you're right. I think that if schools find their ways of staying healthy, isolating players, and being able to keep their football programs healthy and be able to move on while Boulder lags behind and can't control their own situation, at some point it's like, all right, we just got to move on and we just got to leave Boulder in the dust. And that makes Boulder look like a really bad place to be.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that, I think it reflects poorly on a program that, it right now is trying to recover from the fact that, Mel Tucker sort of up and left a little bit out of nowhere last year. You know what I mean? Like CU's kind of in a process of having to redefine itself because of, just the tremendous change that it's overgone as just a program. And then, you throw this wrench in, you throw the wrench of the coronavirus into it. On a broader scale, though, I mean, I also wonder, though, how we just saw in the NFL, with the Tennessee Titans, the Minnesota Vikings, it's like that there was, a COVID outbreak there. And those teams have to halt. Obviously that the NFL nor do the do any of the NCAA programs currently have like a bubble system in place like we've seen in the NBA. And it caused me to wonder, when you've got a group of 18 through 22-year-old guys playing for 12 different football teams, how likely, and these guys spend all their time together, and young dudes make stupid mistakes. You know what I mean? We know better than anybody that, what's the likelihood that there's a coronavirus outbreak, with one team, whoever they played last then has to get, tested. And then, could it just bring the whole sort of Pac-12's, the Pac-12's whole plan, to a screeching halt altogether, especially if other campuses, we've seen how Boulder's acting, and then as a result, the repercussions of that for the CU football team. You've got to wonder on other campuses and stuff like that, in terms of whatever sort of protocols they have in place, how is that going to affect the Pac-12 season as a whole? Yeah,
I think you're totally right. The bubble like we see for basketball and hockey is simply just not possible with football, both NFL and college, just with the sheer amount of people and the factors and that kind of stuff. But you're right. Like, what happens when one of these kids gets sick, like really sick, and they're not getting paid for this. They're playing for themselves and hope that they go to the NFL, but they're sheerly playing for people's entertainment. And it's like, at what point do you draw the line that if this outbreak starts, is it really worth it that these kids are putting their lives on the line? Obviously, it's their choice, but so to a certain extent, what's the morality behind putting these kids at risk for other people's enjoyment? And like you said, it's a good question to ask. And obviously, we haven't seen that so far with any of the SEC schools, thankfully, and hopefully we don't see that with the Pac-12 coming up. And hopefully, Boulder can fix their issues. But it's definitely a big looming question that remains to be answered, and hopefully we don't see it. On a more brighter note, this CU offense. What do you think, Kieran? What's your take on the CU offense?
I got a lot of questions, man. I've got a lot of skepticism. You know what I mean? And so it's tough. It's the nice thing when you get a brand new offense in the NFL. you've seen all the kids play in college, or you have, you've got something to rely on. And, you've got their draft you've got their draft performance, things like that. You've got things to be able to sort of at least make some sort of projection about. And, the high school to college jump's just not the same thing. And, especially with the CU offense, I mean, I'm psyched that we have Dan Cheverini back in, back in the offensive coordinator seat, supporting Carl Durrell in this. The guy's a CU alum, wide receiver, NFL player. The fact that and he's part of Mel Tucker's staff, the fact that he's stayed a constant for the returning players, I think is great. I think that we have 6 quarterbacks listed on our roster right now. We have 6 quarterbacks. Three of them appear to be particularly viable. We've got Tyler Little, and then we've got Sam Neuer and Brendan, and the freshman Brendan Lewis. And like Little is a junior, and he's thrown 6 passes in his career.
Yeah.
For CU. Sam Neuer played safety last year. Sam Neuer was a safety for Mel Tucker last year, and Brendan Little's a freshman. Like, he's 18. The man is 18 years old, and he's going to be getting hit by 22-year-olds, 23-year-olds. Sam Neuer's like probably 22, 23. I mean, the guy, he's a 5th year.
Yeah.
Like, I got questions, man. I mean, I don't know.
You're totally right. This is not. Carl Durrell has not been a head coach in quite a while. He was an assistant in Miami. He was an assistant when he came to Colorado. His last head coaching job was in UCLA in the mid-2000s, and it's been 15 years since that. So you got to question his return to that amount of power. And then you're right. We have 6 quarterbacks on this roster. Three of them are the more viable choices, like you said. But I think when it comes down to it, I think CU wants the fresh start. And I think they should go with Brendan Lewis because Tyler Lytle has, like you said, has had 6 pass attempts in his college career, and you can put him out there. Oh, you can argue that he has the experience, but he doesn't. Sure, he's on the bench. He's rode the bench for 3 years, if you want to call that experience. Sam Neuer, yeah, he's got the most experience out of them, but like you said, he played safety last year, and it's not exactly an easy jump to go from playing safety to running a college offense as a quarterback. So I think you throw Brendan Lewis in there. And if he does terrible, that's okay, but he gets the experience he needs for in 2 years for him to be the CU quarterback that they need him to be, especially because he's a dual-threat quarterback, and we've seen the success with dual-threat quarterbacks, a la Kyler Murray. I'm blanking on his name. He played for Louisville.
Lamar Jackson, man.
Lamar Jackson.
He's built closer to Lamar Jackson than he is to Kyler Murray. I mean, he's, he's 6'2", 225. I mean, 6'2", 2, like that. He's a big dude. He's a big dude who can run. You know what I mean?
He set the squatting record for the team.
Yeah.
Like, you don't see that in a quarterback.
Yeah.
And if he gets lit up freshman year, so be it. But he gets the vital experience, and I think he has enough weapons around him for him to be semi-successful. So I think in terms of the probably the strongest spot on that CU offense has got to be that running back core.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I will say with the quarterbacks, last note on that is that I do think the one thing that Sam Neuer could do is, having played safety last year and having been recruited as a quarterback, sat sort of 2 years plus a red shirt as in the quarterback position. They could always start Brendan Lewis and then have Sam Neuer as sort of a Taysom Hill sort of option. You know what I mean? Have him as just like the athletic guy on offense sort of option. You know what I mean? The guy who's he could throw it, he could run it, he could play receiver, who knows? Yeah, but just like that option, Yeah,
no, definitely.
But I would agree, which takes us right into, I would agree. Wide receiver core is definitely sort of where we're sort of returning, the sort of strongest set of players, and have perhaps some of the brightest freshmen potentially as well.
Oh, definitely. I think I covered this a little bit in one of the previous shows, but I think Mangum and Fontenot got overlooked so much last year just because Mel Tucker's offense ran so much through Montez's ability to throw the ball 50 yards downfield, and we saw the unsuccessful ability of that. But I think that with if they go with Brendan Lewis with a young QB, these two running backs can get a large portion of that production. And like you said, probably the brightest player on that CU offense, Ashad Clayton coming out of Georgia. The kid's an absolute beast. And I think he's the type of player who can make an instant impact on that CU offense.
Yeah. I mean, so Clayton. So I think Louisiana coming. I think he's a New Orleans kid. But number 10 kid coming out of Louisiana. I mean, in terms of in terms of sort of general recruiting, top 200 nationally. The kid runs a 4.42 40. I mean, he's a speedy dude that can absolutely give Fontenot the rest that he's going to need because the guy can't put the whole team on his back. Mm-hmm. Perhaps we could see Katie Nixon in a bit of sort of like a Laviska last year sort of role where Katie Nixon, he's only like 5'8", have him play sort of like a running back receiver sort of like back and forth little role because obviously the kid's got the hands, he's listed as a receiver, but like he's but he's a short dude. And then we've got a lot of as Chevrolet was saying, we have a lot of really, really bright freshmen coming into that wide receiving core that I think they're going to be inexperienced. I think they're going to get lit up by some big dudes, but I also think that they're super, super athletic. I mean, we've got Visca's younger brother Levante coming in at wide receiver, as well as just a couple guys returning. We've got Chris Carpenter coming in at as a freshman who's like just like kind of a run pass, could serve sort of a run pass option. I think that it'll be, I mean, the thing is that freshmen are just such a big question mark in, making that transition to college, even more so perhaps than some of the most talented college players that we see trying to make the transition in the NFL.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but that young receiver core that has basically two big returning players in KD and Demetrius Stanley. But like you said, these freshmen are going to get lit up, and they're going to be humbled, thinking that because they're going to think all that coming out of high school, and it's going to be a really humbling experience when they get lit up by a 250-pound middle linebacker when they're running a slant across the field. It's like, okay, well, this is a completely different level. But you touched on it a little bit, and then one name you left out was we did recruit Jerry Rice's son.
Forgot about that.
Brendan Lewis. So again, another promising young freshman to add. Who they just need experience. They just need playing time, and I think the expectations are so low for this Colorado team in general that if they come in and they do above average, borderline good, I think they surprise a lot of people, and they show a lot of promise going into their sophomore, junior, and then ultimately hit their peak their senior years and really make their names for themselves and make this Colorado offense like feared again. But as of right now, we just got to be patient with this offense, I think.
And I think the one bit of good news, and this tends to be a little bit of an overlooked sort of it's always an overlooked position or series of positions, but ultimately we've seen it's always really clear when their poor is the offensive line, right? I mean, the offensive line is teams that don't have a solid offensive line, an offensive line that's been in the weight room, an offensive line that is experienced, always have their quarterback. No matter, it doesn't matter how good your quarterback is or how fast he is or how fast he can escape the pocket, he's just getting crushed. But the good news is that we're returning a majority of our offensive line. And so the fact that we'll at least be providing, say we start Brendan Lewis, we're at least providing that kind of protection of just, he's not going to be absolutely left out to dry if we can just give him a little bit of, that extra half second in the pocket to either, to make a decision or, to open a hole for either him or, that running back core that we were just talking about. I think that, I think that there's potential there, and I think that certainly as you're saying, in terms of looking a little bit longer term than this wacky sort of 7-game season that we're going to have right now, it could work out.
Yeah, I have to agree. We just gotta wait and see. Hopefully the season comes. Hopefully Boulder can get their stuff together. This football team can get practicing, and we can
finally get excited about that November 6th start date and get back to playing Pac-12 football. With that, I want to thank you all for coming to another episode of Buffalo Dash. If you want to follow us on social media, hit us up at Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. We post that's where we post our that's where we stream our live shows and post our favorite clips. If you want to see more of me and Kieran plus our other shows, I definitely recommend checking out some of the other Pac-12 shows. We got some really good hosts over there. Check us out at dashsports.tv. And also we partner with this super awesome sports site called Sports Pac-12. A couple of our hosts will be writing columns for that. They post a lot of good Pac-12 content. Super awesome partnership going on. But other than that, thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you next week.